Welcome everyone to our first seminar as part of the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods Research Seminar Series for the 2021-2022 academic year. I am so thrilled, honored, and excited to introduce my friend, Kristina Knight, who will discuss with us the resilience of youth programs and consider how innovations in research and practice can allow us to re-envision the work of youth professionals. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't been with us before, the PRC loves social media and we would love to connect with you. So please connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and you can find our previous seminars on our YouTube channel. I am also excited to share with you our October seminar series. A sneak peek will be Dr. Owusua Yamoa, who will present her work related to COVID-19 and food insecurity in October. We'll go ahead and put this registration link in the chat box now for anyone who would like to pre-register so that you're ready to attend next month. Oops. And then just a few logistics and housekeeping for today's seminar before we get started. I'm Dr. Erica Truffle, the director of the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods. And although we would love to have everyone introduce themselves in person, we don't have quite enough time. So we would love for you to add your name and organization in the chat to introduce yourself to others that are joining the call today. If you joined us last year, you'll see that we have transitioned so that everyone can see one another. We're no longer in seminar mode where your faces are hidden. So we're going to ask that while Dr. Knight is presenting, you turn off your video, but then turn it back on during our question and answer period at the end of her presentation. We're going to ask you to use the chat feature to type in questions, and you can type those at any point. I spoke with Dr. Knight just prior to this presentation. While she will try to monitor the chat box, we might not be able to get to it right away, but we will certainly address all of your questions at the end of the seminar. And then we're going to keep everyone muted just so that Dr. Knight can give her presentation uninterrupted. But if you would like to be unmuted at the end of the presentation to ask your question, please just use the raise hand feature and we will unmute your microphone. And so it is my great pleasure to now introduce Dr. Kristina Knight. Dr. Knight joined Case Western Reserve University in June of this year as the Associate Director of the Masters of Public Health Program and an Assistant Professor in the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences here at Case Western Reserve University. She's a community engaged scholar who brings more than 20 years of experience in school, governmental, and academic public health. And her research focuses on the use of health education methods to improve outcomes for youth
professionals, and youth programs. Dr. Knight has had a very long collaborative relationship with the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods, and we're very excited to have her present today. Her focus on education and community provides unique opportunities to engage students within and beyond the classroom. Her passion for teaching focuses on preparing students to support the health of diverse communities with a focus on equity and social justice. So we are very excited to hear today about the Cuyahoga County Youth Work Institute. I will go ahead and stop sharing and turn the screen over to Dr. Knight. Welcome, Dr. Knight.
Awesome. I actually accidentally muted myself while Dr. Truffle was talking and failed to realize that meant I would have to request permission to unmute. So I apologize. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I'm really glad to be here today and really excited to be presenting some of the work that I have been engaged in over the past 5 to 10 years, and really excited for what is coming ahead. And so I thought one of the first things that I would like to do is just to spend some time reintroducing myself to the group, was actually prepared for the webinar mode where I might not see you or you might not see me. So it's a little odd looking at myself, a picture of myself on the screen. So bear with me. But my background is in health promotion, health education specifically. And I consider health education to sort of be the, what's the phrase, the old dog of public health. Except that we learn a lot of new tricks, right? And so I think there's a great, very rich history of health education and public health that really parallels some of the progress that we've seen in both length and quality of life. But as our understanding of health and our practice of public health has evolved, so too has the practice of health education. So there were times where we did not have evidence-based health education programs. We now have that. There were times where health education was sort of the standalone piece for intervention. And while sometimes that happens, we know that health education now is often considered a part of multi-level interventions. And then in this era of public health where we are really looking upstream and looking at the role of policy, we really find a strong role for health education in supporting the uptake of policy. So over the past 20 years, as I've been doing this work in school and community and governmental settings, this role of health education has been evolving and something that I've found to be very critical to my work. And so as I'm thinking about this sort of re-envisioning and re-engaging, there've been a lot of transitions for all of us over the last year and a half or 2 years. And so I was actually working and talking to a group of students about 2 weeks ago when I mentioned that 20 years ago, around this time, I had actually just started the MPH program at Case, and I was a graduate student, new to the program, in a relatively young program, and that actually turned out to be the fall of 9/11 in 2001. And I remember at that time feeling as if there had never been a time like we were living in. And here I am 20 years later saying to myself, there's never been a time like this that we've been living in. And so it was a really thoughtful period, a time of a lot of reflection. We had to pause in a lot of ways, and that meant not just pausing our own personal lives, but pausing the work that we do. And so my comments today about re-engagement and reflection and re-envisioning our work really stem from the events that have occurred over the last 18 months. And I've been asking myself these sort of framing questions. So we've been here before, I've been here before in new, but also very different ways. I've tried to determine what can I learn from the lessons of the past? What's the role of our profession and discipline in allowing us to move forward? What does this mean for my work as a community engaged scholar? But also more specifically for someone who works with youth and youth programs and youth professionals, really feeling compelled to consider how to best support individuals and organizations throughout this time. So I want to talk a little bit about my framing or thinking about my work, how I see and value relationships, and what my role is as a part of this process for community engaged scholarship. And I really believe that it's a collaborative and mutually beneficial process where we work towards improving and enhancing the health of our population, largely through efforts at reducing and preventing disease. And so there's a series of strategies and activities that we employ, but they're really framed by this ideology that we want to have a couple of sort of key things addressed. We want to make sure that what we're doing is compatible with the community, that the community wants it, will lead it, is on board with it, and wants you to be a part of this sort of collaborative process. There's also this focus on capacity, right? So it's not enough to do this work in a way that allows us to sort of engage in research and then sort of leave. We really want to do or engage in scholarship in ways that improve and enhance the capacity of individuals and organizations so that we are also promoting sustainability, which really represents this long-term community impact. And we also know that over time, we have really evolved in the field in public health as a discipline, but also in health education promotion specifically, to really having robust evidence-based practices that we can implement in very traditional and also non-traditional ways. And so if we use this process and we embed these qualities and characteristics throughout it, what we hope is that we are creating lasting social change and improved health outcomes. And so today I want to focus on a couple of things. So we're going to talk about the commitment that CASE has made for nearly 17 years to youth development programs and professionals within the county. And I want to start by sort of describing what I mean by the phrase or the acronym YDP, which is Youth Development Programs, but it also stands for Youth Development Professionals. And I often use that interchangeably. We're going to talk about the state of the field, just sort of where we were in 2019 when we were having broader conversations about next steps and next phases because of the work that we've been doing since about 2004. I want to talk a little bit about some of the emerging roles of research and practice in the field, and then also talk about some opportunities for action. So you'll hear me use the phrase out of school time settings or out of school time programs, which is a broad phrase that encompasses programs, activities, and strategies that occur beyond the school setting. They generally target youth for everywhere from 5 to 24. So we're talking about early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. And these are largely supervised programs that youth participate in when not in school. So I think to some degree, when we think about youth and we think about where they are primarily, there's this feeling that they spent the majority of their time in the school day. And that's actually not in fact true. They spend a significant amount of time there. And I'll share with you that I have 12 nieces and nephews. And one of the things I commonly say is they're out of school again. And so it's just sort of the recognition that yes, schools are definitely an important and significant contribution to the development of young people. But there are also a broad array of support and programs and services that are community-based and school affiliated that also provide support. Sometimes these programs are academic, so you'll see STEM programs or tutoring programs, or sometimes mentoring programs, or programs that focus on recreation or leisure or arts or creativity. And these sort of specialized or multi-purpose programs are things that you find youth commonly engaged in. We know that there are about 7.7 million youth who participate in these after-school programs. And I should just pause for a moment and differentiate between sort of out of school and after school. So sometimes these phrases or terms are used interchangeably. But if you take the sort of literal translation, after-school programs are things that occur literally after the end of the school day, or out of school time programs can occur at any point in time when young people are not technically in school. We do know that there is a growing body of evidence that supports the relationship or engagement of young people who participate in these out of school time programs in terms of increased academic achievement. We see more pro-health or pro-social skills and behaviors, and we also see reductions long-term in health disparities. So youth development programs are a set of programs or activities, kind of like what I described before. Maybe they're academic, maybe they're specialized, maybe they're multi-purpose. But youth development programs as a field are really still relatively young. And often you'll find youth development programs being school-based. So that means that they are operated or run by school districts. They might be school-placed, which means that maybe they're located in schools, but maybe run by an outside organization. They can also be school adjacent. So some of them identify locations that are more proximate to schools, and then sort of use that proximity to recruit young people to their facilities. They can also be school affiliated, which is maybe they're remote or at some distance from school districts, but still have a relationship with schools that allow them to draw young people there. And then there are some fewer and smaller who just have no affiliation with schools and use more of their community connections to really build their programs and establish relationships with young people. When we think about these programs, there is this constant relationship with schools, even for those who are not school affiliated, because again, schools are another significant contribution to the lives of young people. And so largely as the field of youth development has evolved, it's grown and anchored itself often around a lot of educational policies and practices. So when you think about the way that these programs are organized, or the way credentialing occurs, or professional development, it's anchored by governmental agencies that have more of an educational focus. So often these programs are associated with sometimes early childhood education, and that's who they would get their credentialing through. And so they're not specifically health focused. And I point that out now because I'll mention in a little bit about how that really is a unique opportunity for action for those of us in public health. And so these youth development programs often focus on the skills and abilities that young people need to successfully navigate or move to adulthood. And so sometimes you'll see this 5C or 6C model where the programs really focus on competence, what young people will need to act in terms of pro-health or pro-social behaviors. You'll see things about sort of character development, connection. We know that having a trusted relationship with an adult is a protective factor. We look at things like confidence and self-efficacy, belief in one's ability to succeed. And so these C's really represent the core and foundation for the development and implementation of these programs. We know that within Cuyahoga County, there are about 300 or more of these out of school time programs in which about 20% of our population between the ages of 10 and 24 participate. So the individuals who work with or run or otherwise support these organizations are called youth development professionals. And so these are the individuals who run and coordinate and supervise these programs. They are often the ones who have the really trusted relationships with young people. They support the after school and out of school time network, and they engage with youth from all walks of life. We don't have a local estimate for the size of our local youth workforce, but we've been doing, there have been some national estimates of what youth development programs look like in terms of size and scope and function. And on average, we know that about 63% of those programs have about 10 or more employees. So we've been working with estimates of the youth development professional population within the county being around 3,500. What we know about the professionals in the field is that many of them do this work for passion, right? Or because of motivation about youth or their childhood. And so there's some people come to this in sort of two ways. And you know, we see this largely based on age. So there's some people who really start doing their work early and stay until maybe their 30s and then leave and possibly return later. Other people move through some other professional identity for some while, and then later move towards this work in their 40s or 50s, or maybe even later than that as they move towards retirement. We know that for the most part too, it's a relatively well-educated group. So about 2/3 have a college degree or higher, more than half have about a 5-year degree. But we also know that it is a low wage, job. So in general, the median salary is between 27 and 31,000, which is less than the $15 per hour. We also know that they are less likely to have health insurance, and also somewhere between a quarter to a half have another source of income. And so when we see people or professionals in the field moving through, they have high motivation and really high job satisfaction, but they tend not to stay in these jobs long because of issues related to compensation and sometimes related to organizational instability. So given this framework, our understanding of our youth population, the importance of these youth development programs, and the importance of youth development professionals, when we ask ourselves what opportunities are present or why is this an important set of organizations and individuals to work with? It's because out of school time programs are another essential component of the lives of young people. And we know that by working with them, evidence shows us that we can achieve greater health and learning outcomes for young people. We also know that there's considerable variation or variability in program quality, and that quality overall isn't necessarily where it needs to be. And that's in part because there is a broad spectrum of programs with variable resources, real differences in the number of students. And so we see disparities in programs as well. And so that has an impact on program quality. We also know that effective staff are key to program quality. And because we have some high turnover in this field, we also know that programs struggle with recruitment and retention of staff, and that sort of challenges sustainability and capacity. And so we recognized probably about 20 years ago that in Cuyahoga County, as things were coming together, that this really was a prime opportunity for action. And so in 2004, CASE began supporting an academic community partnership that was designed to really target the youth development programs and youth development professionals. And so it's been largely focused on the use of educational strategies to improve health and learning outcomes. The three strategies that were involved were training and technical assistance, and so that still occurs. There was a strong focus on individual and organizational capacity building, and then building this social network and social support, and building this youth work or youth development professional community, because it's been really important to support our individual capacity, but our organizational capacity. So the school districts, by comparison, are regulated and organized and have this inherently built community that supports them in their processes and decision making. And so what we wanted to see with youth development programs was that same sort of structure, but we needed to do some work to build that system and structure and help support it. And so CASE was a part of the leadership of two signature programs. The first was the Troy Mart Youth Development Fellowship that ran from 2004 to about 2012. And then the other was the Cuyahoga County Youth Work Institute. And so this is a nearly $3 million commitment from a really robust public-private partnership. And I think it's also important to note that part of what happened in the development of this initiative is that really made it very possible was the leadership and support of two outstanding transformational leaders. And so Pat Heilbron, who started this initiative, and Cheryl Oates, who continues to lead it over the last 7 to 8 years, have really been great stewards of this work and of this process, and allowing those of us who do this work to be a part of this community and really take leadership and ownership of it. So the Troy Mart Youth Development Fellowship was actually the first signature program, and that ran for about 8 years. And it was a cohort-based program that provided, it was a fellowship for youth development professionals, and one of the first in the field at that time to really take this educational approach to professional development in the field. And so among the What you have here on the screen are some of the findings from the fellowship, but also a snapshot of one of the articles that was published in one of the youth development journals. And so I was actually a fellow. That's part of how I got involved in this work. And it was around 2006, and I was cohort 3. And the fellowship was designed to bring together administrators, frontline workers, practitioners, researchers, in an effort to build our individual and organizational skills, but also to sort of build the foundation for this practice-based research network that would allow us to sort of grow and enhance our field. What we found was that participants in the fellowship demonstrated changes in knowledge, attitudes, and skill, right? So it was resiliency-based. It was based on those 5 or 6 C's. There was also a focus on individual resilience. And so in terms of goal setting and taking steps to achieve the changes that we talked about in terms of evidence-based programs and practices in our work. There was a little bit of a disconnect though. So it was great getting together and meeting and talking about youth development and these evidence-based practices, but there was a bit of a translational gap, right? A challenge in translating what we were doing in the classroom and in our learning communities to our actual practice. And so, part of it might have been an access or a power dynamic or a level of comfort. And so the fellowship ultimately shifted a bit to more of an organizational approach, to really focusing on how we sort of make this intentional commitment and effort for specific organizations, so that we could potentially see if we could make get a bit more movement with organizational change strategies. We also then began to transition around 2007 to the Cuyahoga County Youth Work Institute. And this really specifically focused on the provision of professional development for programs. And so we could take an individual approach. We could do these sort of intensive or immersive trainings with youth development programs. And so right now it's at a point where the Institute through 2020, the beginning of 2020, did about 60 days of training and technical assistance per year, including direct observations for about 300 youth development professionals and 100 youth development programs per year, which is a really significant component or part of our workforce. And so you can see here these sort of guiding principles that were really consistent with the Institute. We took a strength-based or a resiliency approach. We were really intentional about developing in the relationships and the capacity of individuals who were a part of the process. We also recognized this focus on trauma-informed care. And so especially over the last decade, when we're looking at the youth whom we serve, but also the individuals who do this work in this field. Why do they have such drive? Where does this motivation come from? It often comes from experiences or opportunities that occurred in their childhood. It also was important to sort of build this idea of professional development. So, there isn't, for teaching, you have to have your degree and a certification, right? To do youth work, there really isn't that same level of credentialing or licensure. So building a culture or climate for professional development was also an essential component of this work. And so this idea of learning and professionalism, using different learning modalities, doing these really didactic presentations and workshops, really doing them with a lens of equity and inclusion, but also delivering it with integrity, right? And so these are the sort of foundational components of the work. And so prior to COVID, from 2004 to 2020, we had about 16 years of this work. And we were at a point where it was really important to sort of consider what was coming next, what are the next steps, where were our strengths, what were the opportunities that lied ahead, and really to sort of take stock and recognize what had occurred or transpired in the field, really since we started doing this work. And so we recognized that there was growing support and influence or acknowledged influence of the field. that we had really built, at least locally, but we were also seeing nationally, not just because of our work, but because of the work of others, this idea of professional preparation and competence, and evidence-based practices in the field. We also developed well-established partnerships. So there are more than 100 organizations who attend or have participated in institute programming in a given year, right? And so that lets us know about our partnerships, not just with schools, but with government agencies. And we also wanted to just sort of acknowledge that there have, over time, with the Institute and the fellowship, been ongoing evaluation. But as we've tried to shift our focus towards research, we've sort of hit our head at some capacity issues and some sustainability issues. So we wanted to really be thoughtful about what could and what should potentially happen in this next phase. And then COVID hit. And we, like everyone else, were pivoting. I think that's a word that we're all essentially tired of. And I think, I don't know, maybe at the end of 2021, we'll retire it. But during COVID, that's what we all had to do. And so we found that many of our programs struggled. We'll talk a little bit here about, these are some national, the National After School Alliance was really a great leadership, provided great leadership in helping us identify and understand the impact on youth programs. We know that there are already inequities in programs. There are far fewer programs than are needed. We know that the youth who need these programs the most are less likely to have access to them. We also know that because of issues of compensation and instability, we have challenges with youth workers. And of course, the youth workforce or the youth development workforce was really hit hard with COVID. And so there were a number of layoffs, not just to summer programming, but to year-round programming. And so we see here that about, for a third of the program, more than 75% of staff were laid off. And so it wasn't just that everything was pausing, we were losing programs were losing funding. And then those that were remaining had other issues or difficulties in trying to figure out how to connect with youth. And so I want to just also talk about or mention that as much in our work, we talk often about the resilience of young people. And these programs have been so resilient and so creative during the last 18 months in terms of shifting their priorities and process to really meet the needs of young people. And so there was a period of time where we were spending considerable time trying to figure out what are the issues or concerns that we have for our young people navigating this time. And so I think we've all heard about this digital divide and how technology has become such an issue for young people when they were not in school, how many didn't have access or couldn't get to a library, or how many libraries were sort of extending their service so that people could have access in parking lots when we couldn't go inside. So there were two big concerns that were really emerging, and one was food insecurity, and the other was not having access to technology. In many instances, young people who are participating in these programs, they may have food at school, but they also get sometimes their only meal outside of school from their engagement with these out of school time programs. And so I want to share this here because if you're looking at this, this graph here, you'll see a couple of different things. So between 2019 and 2020, you'll actually see initially in the smaller programs that there was, once you get past 100, there's a bit of a shift there. But these smaller programs between 2019 and 2020 were finding themselves really having more young people that they were serving, right? And then as the number of students increases, you were seeing that there were, less students that they were serving. Well, sometimes these larger programs with greater numbers of students actually have more funding, right? They have more private funding, sometimes more governmental funding. there's often more resources there. But sometimes with those requirements comes some rigidity and sort of structure and function. And so also a loss of funding, right? And so with these larger programs, what we found is that it was often these larger programs that were really struggling to be more responsive during this time. These smaller programs that were neighborhood organized, maybe not school based or school placed, maybe somehow school affiliated or not affiliated at all, were using and being driven more by community resources. We saw a number of instances where there were GoFundMe campaigns to support community centers and the work of individuals at community centers to really provide resources and support to young people. So on one end, while these smaller programs usually lack some of the resources and are struggle with access, we really did find this sort of interesting flip during COVID with their ability to adapt and modify what they were doing to address the needs of young people. And so we found many of these programs meeting the needs. So trying to connect families with community resources, trying to help them understand where you could get help or support or food or technology or access to the internet. Some were providing care for children of essential workers. We know in Ohio that required a different certification, right? A different process that you would have to apply for and receive permission to continue to do. And so, again, it's that smaller subset of programs that were, again, maybe school affiliated in some way or non-affiliated that really were driving this process. We also know that, the field is still relatively new as it relates to research, right? Practice-based research in particular. And so some of the initial literature really talks about the way in which the field responded to creating supportive adult and youth relationships, which is really one of the foundational tenets of this work. And so these programs were really great at adopting and adjusting to some of these remote strategies. I don't know if how many of you actually follow some of these youth organizations or programs like the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA. In Cuyahoga County, we actually have a poet laureate whose name is Honey Bell Bay, and she does remarkable youth work. And she, if you follow her on social media, you get to see a lot of her work. And she often really uses these amazing remote strategies to engage young people. And so I followed her during over the last year and a half while she did cooking classes with elementary and middle school students. And I believe it was called the Honey Hive, right? And so they would prepare these amazing meals. It would all be done via Zoom and use of just these remote strategies. We also saw a lot of community-based organizations creating toolkits and resources for parents. And so part of this stemmed from these organizations sometimes coming together to survey parents. I think that if many of you who have children found yourselves also being, part teacher, but also part out of school time program professional, right? And so these programs got together and identified different toolkits and resources for parents and caregivers, and then also went to what some of the young people might call old school. So the idea of texting and phone calls, but also other forms of social media to maintain these connections with youth and their families. Right now, there's still limited research about the implications of that, right? We know in general, we feel like youth were really challenged academically and socially during this time, but we still don't have a lot of data about the immediate or long-term impact in terms of health and other academic outcomes. There were a number of studies that really talked about sort of identifying and focusing on re-engagement and re-envisioning our work and what the opportunities are that lie ahead. So we knew prior to COVID that there were issues of access as it related to youth programs. And so in the midst of COVID, what we recognized is that we could shift in terms of technology, then that created new barriers related to access. And so this idea of access in youth programs is an opportunity, right? We also know that we need to create a more robust workforce pipeline, right? So a number of youth development professionals in a field that already had relative stability, we also know that we need to identify ways of promoting and encouraging people to engage in this work, and also providing meaningful compensation and support, right? And so as we think about the movement towards professional development in the field, that's an area for advocacy. And so during COVID-19, when we think about the work of CASE and these academic community partnerships, the work of the institution, it was a really challenging time. We had to really take a step back. Most of the programs or seminars or workshops that were provided were all remote, like many. We were really responsible for adhering or maintaining compliance to university guidelines. And so things were delivered remote. And since we were already in the process of talking about sort of thinking about how we were going to change or modify or revise the work that we were doing, we started thinking about identifying the needs, doing a bit of this gap assessment, and then applying for additional funding to diversify our funding. The summer of 2021, we piloted a workforce assessment, which is the first time that we've done that. We hope to have that go live this fall. The work of this academic community partnership has transitioned over time. First, it was with the Mandel Center for Nonprofit Organizations. Then it shifted to Weatherhead and the business school. And now it's shifting to the School of Medicine. And we are really excited to be building on our relationship with the Prevention Research Center. And, we're moving through this phase of really informal planning and really trying to be very thoughtful about our sustainability. So an example of what occurred during the last 18 months, we often focus on COVID, but a great deal of our work, especially because it's anchored in these sort of educational foundations, focuses on equity and access, which again are really health related topics, but for some reason there appears to be a bit of tension between this sort of health and education, and that's not uncommon in the work that we do. And so we actually did a virtual workshop on equity and youth work that really, what we were hearing from some of our programs were some of the challenges in helping support young people navigating the events of 2020. Especially with the death of George Floyd and some of the social uprising that was occurring, and how they were feeling disconnected from young people. Young people were reaching out, and we were really struggling about how to help support young people in doing this. And so if you think back to the beginning of our work, where I talk about what this community engaged process looks like, I talked about compatibility, right? And so recognizing that the community was saying, hey, this is something that we feel is important and want to focus on. We also know that this sort of work or training improves capacity and sustainability of our organizations. And so we really took a thoughtful approach to really this idea of equity and youth work, exploring what had been occurring in the field, and really providing information and resources about current practices. And so here we are in the fall of 2021, and the last few days have been really very encouraging and exciting because we are nearing the relaunch of the Institute. So we did take a break in May of 2021 for a number of reasons, but largely due to funding. I knew for some time that I would be coming back on board to CASE. And so there was actually a natural opportunity to transition some of this work into the School of Medicine based on the work that I've been doing with the Institute since 2006. Um, we are really going to try and work on this tension between adolescent health and youth development, and really have a more intentional focus on merging the two. Um, and we're actually going to be moving forward with formalizing our advisory committee and initiating a formal planning process. And then we are actually finalizing our community-wide workforce assessment, which surprisingly, even though we've been doing this work since 2004, we don't really have a good sense for the scope or nature of the workforce outside of its professional development needs. And so we're excited to move forward with that. This week, we were actually notified that we received funding from SAMSA. And so part of this intentional merging of education and health, or youth development and adolescent health, was the recognition that what we were hearing and also seeing was great concern about the mental health of young people during this time, the mental health of youth professionals, the lack of organizational training, but also individual training related to mental health. And so this grant was a collaborative effort with CASE leading the process, but with a number of organizations who came on board and said, yes, we believe this is important. We recognize a significant need in our community. And it's a really great opportunity to do a number of different things. So we will continue our focus on providing training and technical assistance. And in this instance, it will be related to mental health and crisis de-escalation techniques for youth programs and youth professionals. And so this is not something that has been typically done or supported. So we're using the mental health first aid program. That actually is an international and national program. There are a number of mental health first aid trainers, and a number of folks within our community who are mental health first aiders, including youth workers. So we're really excited to really build on the network that has already been established and to help that grow. We're also going to be implementing a new fellowship program. So when you think about the Troy Mart Youth Development Fellowship, it really was about identifying and supporting leaders in youth development. And so what we are going to do is take a similar approach and really develop leaders who really focus on adolescent health, right? And so we want to have cohorts of individuals who are youth development professionals who are adolescent health advocates. And so in addition to mental health and crisis de-escalation, we're going to really broadly focus on adolescent health, how we are going to embed it and collaborate or think synergistically with youth development. And we're also going to focus on the development of a referral network. And so when you think about schools, for example, there are natural opportunities and resources that schools can leverage if they have a young person who is in crisis. Because of the way in which youth development programs are organized or structured, that opportunity does not exist. And so this grant also provides the opportunity for us to work with local mental health professionals to identify and establish a network that will support out of school time programs who have unique health needs or mental health needs for young people. This also allows us to lay the foundation for a practice-based research network. So we've really tried this once before, right? So I believe it was in 2015. There were a group of youth work programs who worked with our family medicine research division. And the idea was to get off the ground this partnership that would allow, explore the feasibility of out of school times program being a setting for research related to youth. And so we were able to identify one opportunity for funding, one opportunity for research related to sleep and youth. And we learned a lot during that time about the potential for this work. And we think what we've done is spent the last 4 to 5 years spending some time really anchoring ourselves around that, and we're ready to move forward with a bit more of that. So as I think about what's occurring and what's coming up, I often think about ways for people to get involved. And so what we would like to do is we should be beginning to do more of the rolling out of the Institute, its new branding and new structure and some of its new function, but also some of its existing programming as well. We were going to be formalizing an advisory committee. similar to what was a little different now. But we're going to be asking those who do this sort of practice and research and advocacy to be a part of the committee. You will notice that we will begin to advertise about various training and technical assistance opportunity, leveraging the lessons that we learned over the last year and a half. We'll be doing this both in person and in remote formats. We also recognize that there is a unique role for advocacy in this work. And so in order to really advance the work of these programs and professionals, we're going to be more intentional about the role of the advocacy. We also want to share the news about our field, about our work, and its impact. And so, the importance of scholarship and dissemination, both in sort of academic and community forums, is really important. And then finally, you'll see there is my contact information. So if you have questions or thoughts about this work and how we will be moving forward, I am welcome to them, and you can shoot me an email. Okay. So that would be the end of my presentation for now. And what I will do is sort of stop sharing and then open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Knight. And I invite everyone to turn their camera back on so that we can see each other and engage fully. And again, just a reminder, please feel free to leave your questions in the chat box, or you can request to be unmuted and we will let you ask your question directly to Dr. Knight. Dr. Knight, I already see a question or two popping up in the chat box.
Perfect. Have you considered framing research in the context of a practice-based research network among youth serving programs? I think that that's a very real possibility. I think my previous experience with this, I was invited to the table the last time this happened. And so it was sort of well underway by the time I came on board. And it wasn't really clear to me why it was happening and whether or not the community of youth serving programs was really ready or interested to engage in that work. And so when we moved forward with our first project, our first study, it felt like there was a fair amount of tension around what was occurring. And I don't know if it was because it was new or because there was just uncertainty, or if it was just, we're already doing a lot and this is just one more thing. It really wasn't clear to me. And so when we did our sort of analysis at the end of that, one of the things we recognized is that it may not have been the right time, that the sites weren't necessary, or organizations weren't necessarily clear about what their responsibility or role would be. It didn't also seem to be generated from the community and have sufficient community support and interest. What we've done since that time is explore the extent to which individual organizations have already been doing a bit of this work and tried to figure out how we share and support them and continue to do that, but also share with them that we could really do this as a collaborative process that would be mutually beneficial and lessen the responsibility of this for the sort of responsibility of this work on individual organizations. So what I hope is, as we get together and build the advisory committee and then consider various work groups, that what will emerge is more of a community-driven process that says, here's what a practice-based research network could look like, and here's what we are collectively willing to commit to. Other questions?
Yeah, Kristina, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Hi, Kristina, it's Elaine. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. It's so good to have you back in Cleveland in case. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Call it a tension, but I think it's probably more maybe even an intersection between the youth development and adolescent health. What do you think is sitting underneath that tension?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that that that's sitting there is the perception of lack of respect and importance. So I think that one of the things that youth development programs and professionals battle is the perception that they are less valued, less important, that the work is less meaningful, and there is the result of that is that there's less support and less resources available for both the individuals who do this work and the programs that they're a part of. And initially, efforts to what some might describe as legitimize the field, that's a word I find really very offensive. But when I talk to individuals who do this work and they talk about what happened in the 2000s initially with the new competency framework or various certifications that they tried to get off the ground, or this movement towards more professional development, there seemed to be people were kind of offended, as if that people didn't know what they were doing or that they weren't doing good work. And so I think it's this battle for legitimacy. And I think that's really part of the tension that exists there. And I think that it has gotten better. And I think part of it, I can use the local example, is that we've built communities of support. And while the work has really focused on youth development professionals and organizations, somehow we've also got a lot of schools at the table here, because a number of schools are doing this work too. And so unintentionally, we've kind of created this place where it's a safe space where we can have these conversations, where this tension can be worked out or worked through. It's still there, but it's definitely, we've made some really big efforts towards making that a bit less palpable when we're in those spaces.
Do you think it has to do with funding itself? Is there more funding focused on adolescent with health outcomes being the focus? Is that part of what drives it?
Mm-hmm. I actually think that there's the shift in moving youth development programs more towards what was occurring with the field of education was largely because people felt there was more money in education. We could use this sort of educational framework, then maybe we could get some of the No Child Left Behind dollars or the 21st Century Learning Grant dollars, which is right now what a lot of these out of school time programs are funded through, these 21st Century Learning Grants. And so there were pockets of money that became specifically designed for these out of school time programs, but they were really largely anchored in education. We don't have that set aside for health or health programs or health related outcomes. In fact, right now, I believe that some of the recovery funding for COVID, some of these out of school time programs are eligible for as long as they have relationships with schools and they can get funding. We don't have similar mechanisms with health, where there is, a potentially, not that the out of school time programs will definitively get them, because the schools are, they have their own plans for the allocation of that funding. But we don't even have a mechanism in our health related field to get these out of school time programs to even be able to collaborate with us and have the potential for that funding. So I think that we have to do a better job of saying these programs are working to improve and enhance the health of young people. And they are valuable contributors to, the work of what we do broadly. And we want to dedicate funding and specific mechanisms to support their work.
Good. Thank you.
Kristina, I have a bit of a question that follows on that, and it's something that you and I have been talking about. I've recently had conversations with colleagues who are interested in reaching kids. And so automatically their minds go to, we've got to get into the school building to reach these kids. There seems to be
perhaps a lack of awareness of both out of school time program and youth workers and youth work among, and this is research folks who don't typically work with this age group. And you and I have talked about, is this a potential avenue to reach youth in a slightly different way? And so thinking about the development of a practice-based research network of youth work, where are the opportunities and how might this kind of grow in a way that there's a shared sense of goals and outcomes and collaboration?
Yeah, so I think that part of it, you're right, it does build on Elaine's question, because I think that I've wondered sometimes when a researcher says, okay, well, I need to get access to young people, and I'm going to go into the schools to do that. And I think those of us who've done that work recognize just how challenging it is. But I'm going to tell you, I don't know if I would go knock on the door of some of these out of school time programs. These relationships and the way that they value working with young people, it could potentially be a really hard sell, right? But it also means, I think, that it's a great opportunity. Some of the things that make the opportunity possible locally, right? It's the years of investment, the built relationships, the trust in those relationships. I don't know that we've been clear with these out of school time programs that, that there are opportunities to build and enhance and grow or sustain their programs as well when we do this work. I also think that there are some, inherent challenges, where schools service the same young people every day for a continuous amount of time. These out of school time programs have a bit more transient, they're a bit more transient in nature. There might be a bit more student mobility or some inconsistency in their presence. And so, but I think that we have the ability to work through that. And I think that these programs need to know that we are committed, that we value their work, that when we are coming in to do this work, we are not trying to add on an additional level or layer of responsibility, that what we're doing enhances their work and their practice, and that whenever it ends, well, I also think they're looking for a long-term commitment and investment, and that whenever it ends, they have increased their capacity as individuals and organizations, and it makes their work more sustainable. And they want to see that I think above anything else, they want to see that there's a meaningful impact on the lives of the young people that they're working with. So yes, I think there are opportunities. I think it's definitely different than school settings. I don't know what why researchers don't think about out of school time programs. I knowing what I know now, I recognize the richness of the opportunity, but I could also think about it as from an sort of an outside perspective, why one might shy away from it. I mean, the complexity of it, they're not as well organized or as well structured, and you have to navigate access in a different way.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Knight? If not, I'd like to ask you if you can to turn on your video, and let's just give Dr. Knight a round of applause. Thank you again for joining us today. Just a quick reminder that we would love to have you join us for our next month's seminar. Our seminars are always on the second Wednesday at noon, from noon to 1:15, and our year will be virtual this year. Please go ahead and register. And if you would like to share this seminar with some of your colleagues, it will be posted and available. The recording will be available on our PRCHN.org website within the next week. And we thank you for joining us. Have a lovely day.